We'll get started.
You're all set.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandy Dagler. I'm the Director of Upstate Planning Design and Quality Assurance for DASNY, and I would like to welcome you all to How Your Firm Can Work with DASNY on Small Projects. Our program is a collaboration with AIA New York State, and we are fortunate to have DASNY staff, architects, and an engineer to share their knowledge and expertise with you. Before we begin, though, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. This webinar has been approved for 1.5 LUs. To receive credit, you must be present for the entire session. Throughout the program, you will see 4 words appear in the chat box and on the screen at various times. Take note of these words as you see them. You will be required to write them on your CE card link that will be provided in the chat box at the conclusion of the program. This card must be filled out and returned to AIA New York State no later than midnight Wednesday, May 5th. Again, be sure to open your chat box to see these words and the CE card link. This webinar and the associated materials are being provided for general educational purposes only. Information provided during this webinar and in the materials should not be construed as professional advice. Participants should consult with a licensed architect or other appropriate professionals concerning the subject matter of this webinar, the materials, and their application to any specific facts or circumstances. The statements of the webinar moderator and panelists are their own and are not statements of AIA New York State or DASNY. We ask that you read the other disclaimers that were included in your registration confirmation and in the Know Before You Go email that was sent to you. Today's learning objectives are on the slide for a quick review. We look forward to lively, interactive discussions and encourage you to think of questions during the presentation. Use the chat box to post questions and comments. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. This program will be recorded and will be posted on the AIA New York State website. Our program will begin with a 30-minute presentation by DASNY's Procurement Chief, Kara Mallard, on professional service contracts, MWBE and SDVOB goals, and procurement processes and opportunities. Her presentation will run to about 11:35. When she's done, we'll take a short break and return with our panel discussion and a question and answer segment. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Kara Mallard, Procurement Chief of DASNY. Kara, it's all yours.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for our Doing Business with DASNY webinar. As Sandy mentioned, my name is Kara Mallard, and I'm the Chief of Procurement with DASNY. I have been with DASNY for 15 years, all within the Professional Services Contracts unit. So today I'm going to give an overview on the professional services contracts that DASNY procures. I will also be discussing the MWBE and SDVOB goals and the process in which we follow to set those goals on each procurement. I'll discuss the professional services procurement process and also provide you with some tips when submitting a proposal. And last, I'll talk about any upcoming professional services procurement opportunities. So I'd like to start by going through the types of contract that the unit handles. The professional services unit handles 3 types of contracts. We handle term contracts, professional services contracts, and DASNY operational contracts. For purposes of this presentation, I will be discussing term contracts and professional services contracts. So term contracts are used for projects that have a construction budget that is less than $25 million. These are $0 based 4-year contracts, and they are service specific. Since these are $0 contracts, the way in which we authorize services on a project-specific basis is through a work authorization. And for those projects with a construction budget between $10 and $25 million, we will go through a modified RFP process. Now, in the next few slides, I will go through the RFP process. Once you have a term contract, we do an abbreviated version for projects that are between $10 and $25 million. Now, professional services contracts are used for projects with a construction budget of greater than $25 million. These are dollar-specific contracts, and they are project and service-specific contracts. And again, these are multi-year contracts as well. And then for any additional services to the contract, we authorize those through an amendment. So now in front of you is a list of the various services that are procured through the professional services contracts unit. Now on the term side, these are not inclusive of all of our active contracts to date, but services that are procured through our term contracting program include architectural and engineering, asbestos environmental, construction management, elevator inspection services, energy performance contracting services, materials testing, relocation services, and surveying services. And again, all of our active contracts are on on DASNY's website, so you can take a look at the services that we currently have procured. On the professional services side, we procure for services such as architectural and engineering, construction management as agent, construction management at risk, design build, and construction management build. Now, DASNY follows New York State Executive Law 15A for MWBE goals and 17B for SDVOB goals. And we take the 30% goals very seriously, and we strive to meet those goals on every project. But DASNY also understands that not every project can meet the 30% goals, and that there are some projects that can exceed the 30% goals. So prior to advertising a contract for bid, soliciting proposals for an RFP, or selecting a term consultant, the DASNY team does discuss the contract requirements and goals with our opportunity programs group. So some of the things that we discuss, if it's a project-specific procurement, we will discuss the scope of work or the project and any specialty items or services to be procured. We also discuss any other early identification of information that may require a consideration of pre-bid reduction of the standard goals. And again, we recognize that this is not a one-size-fits-all, and every procurement should be discussed on an individual basis. Some of the things that we discuss for our term procurements is if this is a returning procurement, were the consultants able to meet those goals, or did they exceed those goals on the previous procurement? So we do review each procurement on an individual basis as it relates to the MWBE and SDVOB goals. Now, as I mentioned previously about the various procurement processes that the professional services unit handles, there are 3 types of procurements that we handle. We do handle a 2-step procurement, a 1-step procurement process, and then a modified RFP procurement process. So in front of you is a timeline of DASNY's 1-step procurement process. And when I say 1-step, that means that when we advertise in the contract reporter, we also include the request for proposal. When we do a 2-step process, we will advertise in the contract reporter, we will receive expressions of interest, shortlist firms, and then send those shortlisted firms the request for proposal. So again, in front of you is a timeline of DASNY's 1-step procurement process. And we use this process for a term or professional services procurement. So the first thing that we do is DASNY meets with our internal or external customers based upon if it's a term procurement that's inclusive of the client, or it's a professional services procurement That includes the client and the facility. So we discuss the business need, right? So we discuss the scope, the budget, if it's project specific, and the schedule. And when I mention the schedule, there are two types of schedules. There's the schedule of the project, right? So if it's a standard professional services contract and we're renovating a dorm, when does that need to be completed? But there's also the procurement schedule, right? If it's a term procurement, when does the current contract expire? So is there a need to expedite the procurement at this time? So based upon the needs of the internal or external customer, the technical staff will develop a scope, a budget, and a schedule. That information is then transferred to the contract reporter and the RFP, and it's advertised together. So at this time, prior to advertising, the evaluation committee is formed. The evaluation criteria has been discussed and included in the RFP. And there's a kickoff meeting with the evaluators to discuss the RFP. We're also discussing the evaluation criteria and the schedule. And I do want to note that at this time, once we release the ad in the contract reporter and the RFP has been advertised, this starts the restricted period. And I'll talk more about this on the next slide. But I just wanted to make mention that once we advertise, that does start the restricted period. So included in the RFP are the technical requirements, the key events and dates, which also includes a pre-proposal meeting or site visit, the question and answers period, and the proposal due date. And I'll say that the pre-proposal meeting or the site visit meeting is very important because there will be representatives from the client if it's project specific, and also DASNY technical staff. So you'll have an opportunity to hear more about the scope of services, the schedule, and perhaps the budget if it's project specific. And most importantly, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. You know, ultimately, the goal is to receive as much information as possible to submit the best proposal. So if you have questions, you know, certainly ask them during the pre-proposal meeting or ask them during, you know, the question and answers period, right? We want to ensure that you have all of the information that you need to submit the best proposal. So about a week after the pre-proposal meeting, the questions from consultants will be due. And then the evaluation team is given those questions, and we're given about 3 to 5 business days to review, answer, and return all of those questions. So proposals are due anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks after answers are posted. And the reason is because if you have a question, and ultimately you have to, based upon our answer, you have to add something to the proposal, we want to ensure that there's enough time. Okay. So now what happens after the proposals are due? So once the proposals are due, they are distributed to the evaluation team. And the evaluation team reviews and evaluates the technical proposals individually. So we review them individually, and then we come together as a committee and we discuss the needs for an interview. And if the interviews are needed, we select the firms to interview. When interviews are conducted, a letter is sent of the interview. It's sent for the describing the time of the interview and also the information that the evaluation team is looking for the consultants to respond on. It is not uncommon to send firms predetermined questions in advance of the interview. You know, ultimately, if there are questions that we have based upon your proposal, we will put that in that letter that goes to you. We want to ensure that you have as much information and you can present upon it at the interview. So once the evaluation is completed, at that time, the committee evaluation process is completed and it goes through a series of internal approvals. So internal approvals mean it gets sent to the managing director of construction. We review the insurance certificates, and also we conduct our vendor responsibility review. We will also be negotiating terms and conditions of the contract with those firms. And again, I just want to make mention of the restricted period. Now, as it relates to this restricted period, DASNY follows State Finance Law 139J. And per State Finance Law 139J, the restricted period is the period of time commencing with the earliest posting, which means when we post in the contract reporter, and it ends with the final contract award and approval by the governmental entity. So what does this mean for you? During the restricted period, or the open procurement, as some call it, all questions must be directed to the designated representative, and that person is listed in the RFP. It's very important to understand who that person is. Now, I will say that there are often times that firms that are responding to a procurement currently have a contract with DASNY, and they're currently providing services on a project, and they currently have a contact or a project manager that they work with. You can certainly talk to that project manager or reach out to them as it relates to questions on projects that you are working on. But there's a clear delineation between a project that you're working on and an open procurement. So just ensure that you're refraining from asking questions of that project manager on any open procurements, and any of those questions are being directed at the designated representative. Okay. So how do you know when to submit a proposal? So what you're going to do is you want to start by looking in the contract reporter and on DASNY's website for opportunities. Now, DASNY's website is broken down into various services: professional services, construction, and operational. You want to ensure that you're looking in the right direction. And I have another slide and a couple slides that actually shows you the website, and we'll go through that. But once you're there, you're going to review the qualifications and requirements section. You're going to understand the services that your firm provides, and if you meet the qualifications and requirements. Next, you're going to understand, do you have the resources to be successful? If you do not, what resources do you need? And ultimately, do you have the right team? If you don't meet all of the requirements, but you're interested in the project, you can certainly sign up as an interested sub and supplier for that project. Consultants are still gathering their teams, and the earlier that you sign up, the earlier the potential to be communicated with. What are some tips when submitting a proposal? You're going to want to read the RFP carefully. Tell a story. What sets your firm apart from others? I will say, believe it or not, the cover letter can be key. Remember, that is the first impression that the reader gets of your company. You're going to want to follow directions. If the directions state that there's a page limit, follow the page limit. If it states that you provide your response in the same order, provide it in the same order. DASNY requests that all submissions are electronic. So there's a detailed process on how to submit your proposals electronically, which can include requesting access to a SharePoint site. So please, please, please do not wait until the last minute to request access to the site or to submit proposals. You're going to want to give yourself sufficient amount of time in the event that you have questions. So if proposals are due at 5 p.m., you're going to want to ensure that you've already asked for access to that site, and you're going to want to ensure that you've already uploaded your documents prior to 5 p.m. We have staff that monitor the mailboxes, and we also have the designated representative. So please ensure that if you have questions, you are reaching out to that designated representative. So in front of you is a list of upcoming DASNY procurements, and you will notice that all of the procurements that are scheduled to be advertised are DASNY term procurements. Now, I also want to bring to your attention that these are tentative RFP dates. So certainly while our goal is to advertise by these dates, these are tentative dates. The architectural and engineering procurement will include the small firm architects. It's scheduled to be advertised late this summer. I know that currently on DASNY's website, it does have an anticipated advertisement date of September 31st. We are trying to work through some contract language, but certainly please monitor the website. And as I mentioned, internally, we have a group that's reviewing the contracts, and we're making revisions based upon feedback that we've received from consultants, and we're updating the current language. And we're also combining procurements that we have procured separately in the past. So we're currently working through the RFP document for the Upstate Western Term Architectural and Engineering procurement and the RFP document. And as it relates to the architectural and engineering procurement, which will be inclusive of the small firm architects, as I stated, it's currently tentatively scheduled to advertise at the end of the summer or early fall. So when we do advertise for the Upstate Western Architectural and Engineering procurement, there will be language in the RFP document that provides the submitters with guidance on how to submit your proposal. This will still be one procurement for AE services. However, there will be clear instructions on how to submit your proposal. Internally, we are going to have a group of evaluators, just like I mentioned that we go through in our procurement process. What we will do is we will evaluate the proposals based upon the services that you submit for. And what we will do is we will evaluate those proposals based upon how they're submitted. So if you submit for architectural services, you will be grouped and you will be evaluated with other firms that submit for architectural services. Same for engineering services and same for small firm architects. We will also be doing something similar for MWBEs and SDVOBs. Submitting in this manner will be for purposes of ensuring that we can evaluate proposals for the same services. This is still going to be a contract for AE services. And I also wanted to mention that for the small firm architects, there will be no contract limit or no project dollar limit as it relates to the small firm architects. These are two areas that were in the previous small firm architectural procurement that have been removed. So from our current contracts, small architectural firms are defined as those that provide complete architectural design services, have 10 or less employees, including all owners and principals, and employ at least one licensed architect registered to do business in New York State. So in our previous procurement, small projects were defined as projects with an approximate construction value of less than $150,000. So, and this is just for Upstate and Western. So previously there was a $150,000 cap on those small firm architectural projects. This procurement, there will be no cap, no limit. There will be no contract cap. The previous procurement had a $200,000 contract cap. This will be removed as well. So ultimately, this will be one procurement for AE services, but it'll include architectural services, engineering, and small firm architects. So for future work, where do you look? So you're going to want to sign up to receive alerts through the New York State Contract Reporter. You can go directly to the Contract Reporter and you can click on those procurements that you want to be notified when we do advertise. Also check DASNY's website. You know, previously I put up a slide with the upcoming procurement opportunities. You know, they start in the middle of May. I would take a look, monitor DASNY's website. And then the screen in front of you is from DASNY's website. When you go to the website, you're going to want to click on opportunities and find the type of opportunity that you're looking for. As I previously mentioned, the website is broken down into categories: construction contracts, professional services contracts, and purchasing and commodities. And then on the right-hand side, there are other options, including in-progress RFP and bid opportunities. And those are important because if you decide that you are not interested as a prime on this contract, you can sign up to be as an interested sub or supplier to be part of the team. And certainly it's always beneficial to, get comfortable with DASNY's website, understand what types of opportunities are out there. There's other sections, as I stated before, that lists all of our term services that we currently have active. And it also explains when those contracts expire. So when they are set to expire, you can anticipate that we would be going out with new RFPs. Now, I know that was a lot to digest. So if there are questions, I can certainly answer now or after the panel discussion.
Kara, there was a question in the chat box that I want to have you address now.
Okay.
Is the submitting firm required to be located in upstate or Western New York? I assume this is for the term procurement.
Is the submitting firm required to be located
in upstate or Western New York?
Yeah. Right now, the way in which the RFP is drafted, it was for firms located in upstate and Western, with the idea that we are going to go out with a downstate procurement at a later date.
All right. There was a question about what distinguishes small architects, which I think you answered. And I think you just answered the question about downstate as well.
Yeah, and I will say, DASNY does it based on dollar value. We don't do it based on square foot cost or number of, floors. In the past, it was based upon construction value.
There's a question, what about out-of-state firms?
So you'd have to be registered to provide services in New York State. I think we would have to look at that. Like I said, we're still finalizing the RFP language. It would have to be based upon where they're located, certainly.
And another question, let me just look here. Hold on a second. What about inspection services? I assume this is a question about whether there will be an RFP for inspection services.
At this time, we don't have one in the pipeline. I will say that what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the number of term procurements, and we're trying to see if we can do some of these procurements under one umbrella. But it's certainly something that we're looking into, but at this time, we don't have a separate procurement for inspection services.
Another question, hold on one second. What percentage of projects under the AE contract may be in historic buildings? Do we have any information on that? I'm not aware of any.
I'm not aware of any information on that.
Okay.
I think the closest we could get would be renovation, but at this time, I don't have any information on that.
Okay. Where would a company sign up as a sub?
Right on DASNY's website, there is a section when you're in RFPs in progress, there's a tab that says interested subs and suppliers. So on a project specific basis, you can go right to that tab and you can include your name.
Great. Oh, there's tons of questions here. Let me just scroll down here. Is there a way to know what distinguished the winning proposal?
You can ask for a debriefing. Certainly if your firm is not selected, you certainly, and I encourage to ask for a debriefing. During the debriefing process, you would understand the procurement process. You'd understand who the evaluators were. You'd go through the technical evaluation criteria. You'd receive any feedback from the committee. Certainly at that time, we like to focus on the firm that we're doing the debriefing with. We don't typically discuss the firms that were selected.
Okay. Hold on one second. If you have a contract under CUNY, for example, can it be used by another client or DASNY?
Is it a contract that was procured through DASNY for CUNY services?
I'm not sure. The question doesn't say.
We did have 2 procurements for MEP services and architectural services, and that was for our CUNY client. However, we can utilize, there is language in the RFP that allows us to use that contract for other clients. But if this question is more along the lines of piggybacking, I'd have to understand what the project is. There are instances where we do CUNY takeovers, where CUNY manages the design and DASNY manages the construction. Maybe someone separately could send that question to me. I could follow
Sure.
up.
Sure, will do. I have 2 questions here that are a little related. How many active firms have contracts? And does DASNY announce which firms are selected?
Yeah, so right now we have about 200 firms that are active. And when I say active, I mean we could issue them a new term work authorization. This isn't services that they, it's not an amendment to services that they provided 2 years ago. We have about 200 active term consultants on our list. So if a project manager, needs an AE, they would go to our term list, and there are 80 active AEs, but there's over 200 active consultants of various services. If you can recall, I brought up the term services that we procure. There are about over 200 active term consultants. And then what was the other part?
Does DASNY announce who the selected firms are?
Yes, at the end of the procurement, if you go back to our website, there is a list of firms that have been selected.
There's a question here. What is the timeline for downstate architectural procurement?
Sure. So we are looking to advertise probably in 2022. And I'm thinking more of the fall or winter of 2022. As I mentioned, we just completed a procurement for MEP services and architectural services downstate.
And there's a question here, which is a clarification question. Debriefing is for feedback for the team submission, a one-on-one discussion. I believe that is correct. Yes, Kara?
Correct. Yep. The debriefing is typically conducted by procurement, and I encourage anyone to get a debriefing, whether you were selected or not selected, but ultimately procurement will gather the information from the evaluation committee, and we will sit down with the consultant, walk them through the procurement process, provide feedback from the evaluation committee, discuss the evaluation criteria, and answer any questions that they have.
Thank you, Kara. So at this time, we're going to stop with the questions for this presentation, just so we can stay on schedule. We will get back to people with questions, that we aren't able to answer in the presentation. So thank you, Kara. Thank you for a good presentation. We are going to take a short break, and our first word should be on the screen. Our first CE authorization is our first CE word. So write down that word, authorization. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Please be back at 11:41. We'll get started with the panel discussion. So 11:41, take a few minutes, We'll be back in a few minutes. Could the panelists please turn on their video and their microphone? This time I'm asking the panelists to turn on their video and their microphone.
Mic's on.
Mine's on.
Thank you.
Sandy, should we be keeping our mic on throughout the discussion or just turn it on and off when we're answering a question?
I would say turn it on and off just to keep background noise to a minimum.
Okay.
But keep your video on.
Okay.
Molly, if you can send us all the chat questions, we can go through and see the ones that we weren't able to answer in the presentation, and we can get back to you on them.
Sure thing.
Sandy,
Yes.
one question I'm surprised didn't come up earlier, but I bet folks would be curious to know how many term contracts you intend to award.
Ah, good question.
Yeah, probably by category, right?
Right.
Yeah, and yeah. It's something that we discuss as an evaluation committee, just based upon, you know, how many we previously selected, how much work, what the pipeline looks like. There's a lot that goes into it, but I mean, it's good for
Sure.
everyone to know that.
Right. Well, it's more than one, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think that matters. I think that's what people would be interested to know. It's not because some of the other agencies have very small, you know, they'll issue 3. You know,
Yeah,
you guys issue
80.
dozens.
Yeah, we issued, I mean, we issued 40 upstate, 40 downstate. So that's why I
Yeah.
did mention we had 80 AEs.
Yes, that's definitely worth.
Yeah.
They would want to know that.
All right, well, we're going to get started now. I'd like to welcome everyone back from the break. In this session, I'll be leading our panel in a discussion on frequently asked questions working with DASNY. And again, we encourage your questions and comments through the chat box. We will make sure that any questions we don't get a chance to answer during the presentation get answered afterwards. So before I introduce our panel, the second CE word should be on the screen. Second CE word is evaluators. Make note of that word, evaluators. Please mark it down, and then we'll get started with our panel now. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. First off, Terrence O'Neill, FAIA Lead AP. is the managing principal of Tonab Architecture PLLC, located in New York City. His firm is a full-service architecture and design firm specializing in affordable housing, schools, and healthcare facilities. Our next panelist is Bart Trudeau, AIA. Bart is the president of Trudeau Associates, a planning, design, and IT consulting company located in Latham. His firm has done hundreds of projects with DASNY and has been involved in term contracts, individual project contracts, design build, construction management, and other procurement types. Our next panelist is David Meyer, PE, Lead AP, BD+C, CEM. Dave is a partner with Pathfinder Engineers and Architects in Rochester, New York. Dave has 40 years of mechanical engineering experience and serves as project principal for Pathfinder's sustainable projects that include university facilities, high technology clean rooms, and manufacturing facilities. Michael Clay Sr. is the Director of Opportunity Programs for DASNY. Chris Curry is a Senior Contract Administrator for DASNY. John Savona, AIA Lead AP BD+C, is an architect with DASNY. So welcome panel, thank you for agreeing to be here today. I thought it might be good to start with asking our design consultant panelists, Terry, Bart, and Dave, if you would talk a little bit about how it was that you got your work with DASNY originally. How did you get your first project? And Terry, why don't you start? Terry, I think you're
I have
muted.
to unmute, I'm sorry. It's a long story because it took us a really long time to get our first DASNY term contract. We started attending DASNY conferences, the old DASNY conferences years ago, when every year DASNY would have a conference and each department would have a table and you could go around and learn about DASNY. And so we got a chance to meet all of the key personnel, the people in the contracts department, some of the project managers, and but it was a good opportunity for DASNY to get to know us and for us to get to know some of the people in DASNY. But every time we went for a DASNY term contract, we didn't win, and simply because we couldn't kind of overcome the point system. You know, you go and you get a debriefing and you find out how many points that you won and then how many points the winning firms won. And it's just as a small firm, it's very, very difficult to compete with larger firms that simply completed a larger volume of work. So when the DASNY personnel are sitting around the table reviewing these proposal responses, and they might see 4 or 5 or 6 really good projects from our firm and see just many, many more impressive projects from the larger firms, it was just really difficult for us to get enough points to win a contract. So when DASNY came out with the small firm term contracts, which restricted the competition maybe to small firms, that's when we finally won a contract under the small firm terms.
Mm-hmm. Dave, do you want to comment on your firm?
Sure. Well, I want to also mention what Terry pointed out about the former DASNY MWBE conference, which was for my introduction to DASNY. Gosh, that was in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And my partner Lynn and I had never worked with DASNY before. We thought we would go to the conference to meet some people and see what we could learn. And we met Michael Clay, and we had a good time. We met, introduced ourselves and what we do to the staff in attendance. And it was about, I don't know, maybe a year later that there was a project down at Binghamton University, and Michael remembered us and recommended us to the architect. And so our first project was as a mechanical subconsultant to an architect for that project. And as a consequence, we got to know DASNY. DASNY got to know us, and and it's built from there. And we're successful having, with term contracts and other capital projects over the years. But that, again, it was just, an introduction and getting to know folks, and DASNY's procurement office making a connection for us, frankly.
Thanks. Bart, what's your take? Bart, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Just a little bit to add, because I think Terry and Dave covered most of it for how you would approach that today. I think taking the approach where you're teaming with another firm, as an architectural practice, you might be accustomed to wanting to be the lead, but especially if you're a small firm and having a hard time getting your credentials noticed, competing with larger firms, teaming with a larger firm because you offer a particular specialty or something like that can be a good way to get introduced to working with DASNY. The other thing which I've done, I've had other architecture firms reach out to me to talk about how do I get started working with DASNY. So, especially through the AIA, reach out to your colleagues, and DASNY is always very available to help new firms get initiated into the process. But don't hesitate to reach out to your colleagues as well. Generally, I'm always happy to meet with people and discuss, what you can do to get started. Be prepared for competition, though. As Terry pointed out, DASNY's a big, very appealing client, and when you apply to projects, you're going to be in a big pool. So you really have to do your very best to stand out. It's not easy.
Very good point, Bart. I'd like to offer the DASNY side at this point, the DASNY view. John Savona or Chris Curry, could you talk about what makes a submission stand out to you when you're reviewing proposals and RFPs? What makes a submission stand out and gets your attention? John or Chris, or both of you?
Yeah, Sandy, I'll start. I mean, some of this stuff Kara kind of hit on in her presentation earlier. But, from my perspective as an evaluator, first and foremost, we want to see that the proposal's, free of errors, aesthetically pleasing, and easy to read, easy to follow, ensure that it follows the instructions that are provided in the RFP. But from more of a technical side, I think something that stands out to me is it's really clear and evident when a firm spends the requisite amount of time, doing their research on the project, doing their research on the client, exhausting all available opportunities that they can to do some background and really, help develop that proposal that's really focused and really on point. Another couple of things that were talked about earlier were, ensuring that you have, good strategic partners. A recent example of that is, we had an auditorium project that was, obviously it's a specialty type of engagement where it's a theater or an auditorium, but it was really MEP heavy. So you want to make sure you have the right HVAC consultant in that situation to really meet the needs of that project. And then also, another thing I look for is, oftentimes the firms have, really great requisite experience, but we also want to make sure that the actual team involved has similar type of experience. Sometimes there's a disconnect there. And the ones that stand out are the ones that really align those two sides. So I'll pass it over to John now.
I think, Chris, you've covered it very well. And like Chris said, I think most importantly is following instructions. That's a real red flag for us when we see that the instructions weren't followed. Essentially, that shows us that, what does that mean going forward into design if they can't follow these basic instructions? Also, the strength of the project team is very important. And, we typically look for who's on that team and the experience of those people. It's not necessarily, I think Terrence was mentioning the difficulty in like small firms getting on initially is that larger firms would have a vast amount of experience in projects. For myself, I typically like to look at the project team and see the sort of experience that they have and their qualifications. And I think lastly, don't be that firm that has the A, B, and C team. You do not want to be recognized like that. So just make sure you've got the proper management and oversight and quality control so that your teams are consistently providing the same high level of quality.
Good point, John. Very good point. I'd like to ask Michael Clay to take a minute and talk a little bit about the MWBE and SDVOB requirements on our projects. There was also a question in the chat box about whether you had to be certified by New York State or if being certified by New York City would count toward a DASNY project. So Mike, maybe you could give us a general overview and then address that question.
Sure, Sandy. Good morning, everyone. Just a point of clarification. There is no Michael Clay Sr.
Oh,
There is only Michael Clay. My
sorry
father
about that, Mike.
did not have a senior, so that's okay. And the title Senior Director, Opportunity Programs Group and Co-Leader of Procurement. So just a little quick clarification, no big thing. So on responding to professional services opportunities, I would suggest to anyone, whether it's a team or an individual firm, that you address the MWBE and SDVOB goals within your response in your proposal. I think Kara outlined the who, what, where, and why how we set goals, but we establish goals whether they are a term contract or standard professional services contract. We outline what the MWBE and SDVOB requirements are. And then that is part of the selection team in which my staff is involved with every selection. That is part of the review process for each and every professional services procurement that we do. Now, if you are New York State certified, then as an M or a W or an MWBE, then that is sufficient in order to meet or achieve either the M or the WBE goal. If you're an SDVOB, service disabled veteran-owned business, the same thing would apply there. You can't meet both the MBE and the WBE goal just because you are either certified as an M or W. You would meet what you are certified for. So if you are certified as an M, then you would achieve the MBE goal. It would be expected that you still would use sub-consultants to make up your WBE portion and your SDVOB portion of the goal. The fact that you are New York City certified does not count toward the MWBE utilization. If you are New York City certified, then you might be able to impress upon Empire State Development to certify you by the state, because there is an MOU between the City of New York and Empire State Development, or ESD, in terms of when you apply to the city. You can also click a box to indicate that you would like to be considered certified to become certified as a New York State MWBE, but that's at the point of your submittal of your application. So again, if you're New York City certified, you should endeavor to become state certified. Only state certification can be counted toward M and WBE goals or SDVOB goals on our contracts.
Thank you, Mike. I'm wondering if any of our design consultants on the panel want to talk about specific roadblocks that you may have encountered and how you got through those. Bart or Dave or Terry?
Well, I kind of talked about one before, and that's just competing in general. But maybe another one, sometimes an RFP will ask for 3 completed projects in the last 3 years. And Kara very clearly said to read the qualifications. And so when an RFP comes out and we have not completed 3 projects of that type in the last 3 years, we just don't submit for that procurement. But it does get frustrating for the smaller firms because it's most of the time it's difficult to meet that that a requirement such as that, because you might have 2 completed and 1 is in design or something like that in the last 3 years. It's kind of a tight time period, and things happen slowly in the design and construction industry. So that's one thing. And other than that, just being a small firm in general. But I think they kind of overcame that when they came out with the small firm terms. And I guess now they're going to have the small architect one, which sounds even better because it's not going to have the dollar limit on it, which is also not a very good restriction. So I'm glad they're getting rid of that.
Bart or Dave, anything to add?
Oh, go ahead, Bart. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Go. Well, I was just going to follow up. With Terry, I'm kind of echoing his comments on being a small firm. Part of the advantage, DASNY has been working with AIA, and I know we have been able to communicate to DASNY that it's tough as a small firm when you're competing against a large firm. So with a small firm, you're basically a team, and so if you want to show that you've done 5 projects of a particular type in 5 years, that one team would have to have done that. Whereas if you're a big firm and you've got a dozen teams, any one of those dozen teams could have done those projects. And I think DASNY has made some strides towards leveling that out to make it a little bit more reasonable. Also, I think it can be a roadblock, or I think anyone who's putting together a team should consider it a roadblock if you're when you're pulling together your team on meeting the MWBE and SDVOB goals. DASNY, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I misstate anything, but I believe DASNY can issue waivers on meeting goals. So if you're putting together a team and you're thinking, I'm pretty close in meeting the goals, so let's submit this way. If I was advising that team, I'd say, don't do that. Meet the goals as a minimum. Meet or exceed the goals. It's really because you're going to be putting yourself at a significant disadvantage when you're competing against a bunch of other teams and they're meeting the goals and you're not. I think that's it's a major strike against your submission.
Mike Clay, do you want to comment on that?
No, absolutely. Bart, you're 100% correct. Again, obviously at this point of the procurement process, there's no work assigned as of yet, whether it is a term procurement or standard professional services. So you're putting your best team forward. So you should at all costs attempt to meet the goals instead of submitting a proposal and requesting in that proposal, well, I like to try to get a waiver for either a certain portion or all of the goal, because we've had challenges that does not bode well, because remember, as Bart underscored, your competition, for lack of a better word, is looking to maximize that particular aspect of the procurement, and they are submitting firms that solely meet the MWBE requirements. I just want to state one other thing. One of the things that I think should be underscored, and something I've championed for a number of years here at DASNY, and I think we've come around to a point where if there are M&Ws who, such as we've heard from our committee here, that you can MWBEs and SDVOBs submit as primes with an all MWBE team, or with an MWBE in the lead with other non-MWBE firms. I know there's been some prohibition at some point years ago about, well, an all MWBE team, but if you meet the form and function of the procurement and show depth of resources and experience and knowledge, not only through you as the team leader, but also your sub-consultants, I can assure you that will be evaluated at DASNY. And that is something that I think, and we've had several different conversations, Terrence, myself, and others, Dave Myers, that, you know, the time has come for M&Ws to be able to assert themselves, to not just be sub-consultants, but also to be prime consultants, again, where the opportunity fits.
Thank you, Mike. I want to
Sandy,
throw out a,
oh, go ahead.
oh, go
I was
ahead.
just going to add one thing about the need for flexibility. You know, John and Chris had mentioned the quality of the team, the project team. Well, you know, like many on this call today, you know, our firm is multidiscipline, and you know, if you're operating a multidiscipline firm, you know, the strengths of each of your internal teams may well be different, and DASNY does look at that and is considering the qualifications and the capabilities of your team as it is. So, you know, it behooves us to be flexible, to be sub when that makes sense, to prove our capabilities by discipline, and seek prime opportunities when we're truly qualified to do that. So, and you know, the comments Bart made about teaming are really critical, and so that need for flexibility and an acceptance of that, I think, is imperative for the AE community.
Very good points, Dave. I want to throw out a question to any of the panelists who wants to answer it. And the question has to do with the learning curve of working for DASNY. Dave, you mentioned that, you know, you got your first job through, you know, a reference from somebody, but then what do you do when you got your first job? You have to learn how to work for DASNY. So I'd be interested to hear on the consultant side what that was like, navigating that learning curve, but also on the DASNY side, how you navigated and helped our consultants make that learning curve. So I'm gonna throw that out there for anybody who wants to answer it.
Can I start on that one?
You absolutely can.
Sure. Well, DASNY is a very large organization, and any large organization has their particular way of doing business. And what I will say about DASNY is that it is very well documented, and DASNY is committed to helping you get through it. When we began, we didn't know DASNY at all. We'd never negotiated a contract, anything. And so all of the, you know, all of the guides and contract requirements and processes for QA/QC reviews and all of those things were new to us. And, you know, as newbies, we stumbled our way through, but when we didn't understand, we asked questions, and DASNY, somebody in DASNY staff stepped up and helped us answer the questions so that we could succeed. And you know, over the years, I think DASNY has done a very fine job of understanding that the AE community is a key team member to what they're trying to accomplish with their client base. So you know, ask questions, understand that there's going to be things that, if you've never worked with DASNY before, there's going to be things that you perhaps have not seen quite in the way, you know, from, you know, design submissions and QA/QC reviews to, frankly, how you submit pay applications and get paid at the end of the day. But DASNY has it well documented and is prepared to help you.
I'd be interested, John, if you want to talk about, you know, having navigated some new consultants through that learning curve, if you have any observations.
It does seem overwhelming at first, I'm sure, for a new firm coming to work with DASNY, as far as documenting things, paperwork, quality control and reviews, going through permitting, going through construction administration. A lot of challenges at first, but I think that after you've gotten through that cycle, maybe 2 or 3 times, it really becomes easy. Not just from the fact that it's easy, but that process actually gives you a roadmap to doing things the next time, so that you know exactly what to expect. there's no unexpected things that are going to come up in the future. So it maps things out rather succinctly because we've documented so many things.
Mhm. Bart or Terry, do you have any other observations on that question?
I'm still waiting for when it starts to become easy.
I heard that. I have the same question.
I'm sorry, John.
Yeah.
It's not a joke. I mean, there's a, DASNY is a very, we keep saying that. So, I think everybody gets that. And what I would say is, echoing Dave, that there's lots of people, DASNY is very accustomed to bringing new players up to speed, and there's a lot of people that are there to help, but you're gonna need help. I mean, it's a lot to learn. There's a lot of process. I've heard of small firms where they don't, may not even have full-time administrative staff. I'd say that's really difficult if you're going to be working with DASNY. And I hate to say that but that's kind of true. If you're a principal and you're doing your own billing and trying to do projects, it's going to be very tough. It's just being realistic, with that.
Yeah, I think Bart is exactly right. The payment process is a challenge. I think it's they changed it recently, and it's a little bit easier now than it was. Certainly, comments are very challenging. If you're used to responding to comments from any public agency, you at least have some introduction to what it's all about. But with DASNY, often you'll get comments from your DASNY project manager, and then you'll get comments from the user most of the time, and then you'll get comments from DASNY Quality Assurance in Albany. Sometimes it can seem overwhelming. Then you get your architectural comments, your mechanical comments, your electrical comments, and everything. You have to watch the responses on the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing to make sure they didn't say something, architect will respond or something like that, and make sure it doesn't go out that way, because it's just going to get kicked back. So it is just a lot of process. But then, as the other panelists have said, there is a lot of help. And I would even say patience on the DASNY side in terms of, dealing with all of this and doing things the right way and submitting the payments in the right way and checking the right box, on the payments in the proper way. But it is a lot of process to follow working with DASNY.
So I just want to
Okay,
point
well,
out
so
to
maybe-
everybody, I just want to point out that our third CE word is on the screen. It is qualifications. Please make a note of it. And I'm sorry, I interrupted someone.
No, I was finished.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Bart was right. Easy was probably the wrong term.
And certainly, if you have suggestions for ways to improve that process, please share them with the DASNY folks you're working with. But
Sandy,
we're always open to suggestions.
I think context is also important for people to understand, when they're working with you. DASNY has, you're not out there on your own. You can't make up your own rules. You have a tremendous amount of oversight and transparency requirements. And I know, what to us when we're putting together the information might seem like, kind of arbitrary and excessive. There's always a reason why, historically something has happened. There's been an audit, there's been whatever, and you've had to produce certain types of information, and now you have to do that going forward.
Right.
And it is the way it is. You gotta.
That's true.
Gotta do it.
Very true. So at this time, I'd like to open up to the question and answer session. There were a few folks who submitted questions ahead of time, and I'd like to address those first. Michael Maturo from DYAMI Architecture asks, I would like to find out if it is truly possible to work with DASNY without having had prior experience working with them or other governmental agencies. I think the answer is yes. I think all of you had your first job at some point. Am I correct? So obviously the
Yes.
answer is yes. And I think all of our panelists have discussed some of the challenges and you know, the things that happened before they were able to get that first project. But I would say, you know, submit and hang in there and do your best, and you'll be rewarded eventually. Robert Fernals from Savin Engineers says, where in New York State are the small projects located? Well, I think they're everywhere. They're everywhere in New York State. What is considered a small project? That I think is really based on context. We don't have a definition. We did have a definition in a previous procurement where a small project was one that had a construction value of $150,000 or less. We have abandoned that definition for our new procurement. So I think, you know, I hate to give this as an answer, but I think it depends what a small project is. It's going to be really context specific. Is this seminar for CM services? The answer is no. We're talking about design professional services. And what are procedures for filings for approvals permitting on DASNY projects? John, maybe you want to talk about that, on how that's gone on your projects?
So typically, a consultant would submit documents at various phases depending on the project. And we would do a QA/QC review by trade. And at 100%, once we have sign off, a permit would be issued for the project, and then it would go off to bid.
So generally, for many of our projects, not all, but for many of our projects, DASNY is the permitting agency, unless we're in New York City, and then in many cases, the Department of Buildings is the permitting agency. So it really depends on the client and where in the state we're located. A question from Tony Alfieri of Tony Alfieri Architect. I was wondering if DASNY had considered or was planning on developing a category of on-call consultants that specialize in niche expertise that would be relevant to their clients. Kara, are you still on the line? Do you want to respond to that?
Yes. Hi. So ultimately, you know, I mentioned this earlier, we are trying to get away from having multiple procurements, and we're trying to bring services under some of our other larger procurements, like under one umbrella. So I don't know what types of services you're speaking to, but ultimately what we're trying to do is, you know, maybe there, as it relates to AE services, we would update the RFPs to ensure that if firms provide those niche services, that we understand what types of services they provide. And then internally, we can certainly share, you know, if you provide a certain service, you know, when a project comes up, we can share that information.
Thank you, Kara.
Sandy, could I comment on that also?
Absolutely.
So we have a specialization in student housing planning. And that, you know, it's a good sized chunk of our work, and we'll emphasize that when we put in our submission. But our whole submission for a term contract, for example, is going to be general in nature, and we'll be sure to have a team that fills out a capacity that can do a variety of projects, not just student housing planning. So that's one approach that you can take. Another approach you can take, especially if you're new to DASNY, if you have a particular specialization and you know that it's something that DASNY needs on some of their projects, team with another firm. Even if you're an architecture practice, we've done this many times, we'll team with another architecture practice. And if you're not accustomed to doing that, I'll say, you know, in DASNY, that's a fairly common process. You know, DASNY's open to it, and we've done that successfully many times. you might just be on that architect's team for your particular specialty, and it can make that team stand out and strengthen their submission.
Good points, Bart.
Just to add to Bart's comment there, seek out firms that complement your firm's ability and develop working relationships on various types of projects.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that goes a long ways. And also to highlight your firm's specific abilities. Like, for example, I had a project a few years back where we were trying to evaluate some precast panels on a high-rise building, and we found the most cost-effective way to do that was with a drone. So there was a consultant who had a team member that specialized in drones observations like that. So it was, so it's this sort of team, various types of team buildings for various types of projects. The more you build, I think, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you. One final question that was submitted ahead of time from Scott Manine of Nelson Associates. Is DASNY going to post the small firm upstate opportunity this September as the website indicates? Kara, I think you covered that in your presentation that yes, we are.
Yes, I had indicated on my slides, we have a tentative release date of the end of the summer. On the website, it does have September 31st. So we are looking to advertise in between those two dates, recognizing that my date was a tentative date.
Thank you, Kara. I'm going to take some questions from the chat box. Just give me a second here. Do small firm project teams need to consist of full-time employees of the firm, or can they be independent consultants or a multi-firm partnership? Can you take that one, Kara?
Sure. So as it relates to the definition of small firm architects, that's as a prime, we have that definition. But if you're teaming with someone, that's fine, because again, recognizing that this is going to be a full AE procurement, there are going to be other services that the small firm architect, perhaps cannot, do on their own. But as a prime, we will have a clear definition as to what a small firm architect is.
And what about federal certification as a woman-owned small business? Does that count towards state contracts? Michael Clay, could you take that question?
Sure. No, you need to be New York State certified by Empire State Development, federal certification, as it relates to meeting or achieving or exceeding MWBE goals is not applicable.
Thank you, Mike. Can DASNY clarify how small firm requirements will be different in terms of experience, completed projects, etc.?
So what we have discussed, and we haven't finalized anything, but what we have discussed, based on conversations with our consultants, is having evaluation criteria that's broad enough so that small firm architects can meet that criteria and our larger AE firms. Things that we're looking at are, the number of project examples in a certain amount of time. For example, in the past, it's been 5 projects within 5 years. Well, the feedback we've received from small firm architects is, maybe we can't do 5 projects in 5 years, maybe we do 3. So those are the things that we're looking at, but we do want to keep the criteria or the evaluation information broad enough so that everybody can apply, and we're not going to have 2 separate scoring or evaluation criteria for small firm architects versus the larger AE firms.
Thank you, Kara. Here's a question: for term contracts without project-specific scopes of work, it can be hard to establish how the team will meet M&WBE goals on each project, since it's unknown which consultants will be needed for each project. How can we address that in the proposal? Michael, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. So again, if it's architectural, if it's engineering, depending upon which discipline you are responding to, then obviously under the heading of architecture, there might be a need for specialty consultants to supplement that architectural expertise. So I would, if I was responding, indicate that I have some what I would call firms that have specialty, for example, a structural. I may have, you know, a MEP. I may have some other disciplines that would complement the architectural effort. And again, we realize that as a term consultant being considered, you don't have any specific work, but the whole point of it is for you to spend some time identifying potential firms that could work with you in support of the architectural effort. And then once you, and if you are selected, then obviously you can be a bit more specific based upon the work authorizations you'll be assigned.
So stay where you are, Mike. I have another question for you.
Okay.
How would a firm find SDVOB subs?
Sure. It's a little alphabet soup, so welcome to my world. There are two entities that kind of manage the MWBE and SDVOB effort. As I've mentioned, MWBE is Empire State Development, or better known as ESD. They do the certification process. For service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, that is New York State Office of General Services, or OGS. They are responsible for certifying firms. You would go to the OGS website. They have a database / spreadsheet of firms based on discipline and also regions. So you would be able to search for firms that would help meet your area of specialty that you're looking for SDVOBs.
Okay, and one more question for you. Does DASNY facilitate matching MWBE firms as subs with primary firms submitting proposals in any way? Is this through the interested supplier designation?
The short answer is there is sort of a demarcation line, if you will. We try not to get into recommending or partnering firms with each other. I think you heard Dave Myers from Pathfinders, who had attended our conference that we had, an MWBE conference, and a firm was looking for some expertise that Dave and his firm had, and we made a recommendation, not just of Dave's firm, but of several firms. So my short answer to that is, if a firm, for a recommendation, we don't partner, or it's not like the dating game or speed dating. What we do is, if a prime asks to looking for an MEP MWBE consultant, then we will refer whatever the number of MEP consultants that may be able to service, if it's upstate, downstate, or statewide. However, the interested sub-supplier is an effort that I put together several years ago to help facilitate the interaction with subs versus primes prior to a procurement process, to hopefully be able to kind of stimulate the interaction between the two groups. So that would be one acceptable way that you could. Also, the other way would be to look at who, for example, if you're looking at existing firms, to go on DASNY.org, www.dasny.org. There is a complete listing of the existing term consultants with their contact information, the number of work authorizations that they've received, and the dollar value in total for those work authorizations. That affords you an opportunity, because I'm sure some of these firms you may have interacted with in prior projects, or if not, this would be a good opportunity for you to introduce yourself to those firms. But the interested sub-supplier list is appropriate for a current procurement, versus the list that's on DASNY.org are of firms who are currently under contract to DASNY.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that clarification. We're going to have our last CE word is submissions. So make a note of that word, submissions.
Sandy, can I offer a couple of additional comments on the MWBE teaming?
Yep.
It's a really big subject. I mean, we could spend the whole time just discussing that. I guess a couple of points, though, for people that are putting together teams for submissions. It's really important that you have ongoing working relationships with the MWBE firms that are on your team. again, just keeping in mind that when you put in a submission, you're in competition with a lot of other people, and the reviewers that are looking at your submission are going to see how much experience the lead firm has had with the MWBE firms. And it helps to strengthen your submission if it's clear that you're a firm that this team of consultants has successfully completed projects together. So it's tough if you're, if you're putting together your submission and you don't have any firms that you've worked with, start working with them, outside of DASNY or whatever. It's, that kind of thing matters. DASNY also holds conferences for MWBE firms, and that's a great place to get to know firms. We always participate in those. And I would say, when you're putting together a submission, it's there was the earlier question on how do you know what firms to include if it's a term contract and you don't know what the projects are going to be. The DASNY RFP is very clear about the types of projects that are going to be issued, and it's a really broad variety. So if you're a small firm, it's actually quite easy to put together a team that meets the requirements. You're going to need the usuals. You're going to need MEP engineers and structural engineers and site civil, and really not difficult to come up with a team that meets the requirements. On an individual project basis, we do a lot of roofing work. It's tough. You have to get a little creative on how you put your teams together. If you're a big firm and you're putting together a submission and you're like, we already have all these disciplines covered, think again. You got to pull in team members that are going to do some of the disciplines that you might otherwise do in-house. And ideally, again, those should be firms that you have a track record of working with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Sandy, if I could just build on one other point that Bart made.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, especially on the term side, like everyone mentioned, there's no project involved, but we do expect firms to gather a team of MWBE consultants. And a lot of times, I would say in most cases, it's part of the evaluation process, and it's a scoring category. So one of our biggest feedback items in debriefings, unfortunately, is this topic. And it's a common misstep that firms have where they may not have filled out the utilization plan, or they may not have identified key partners. And, as it relates to scoring, it's oftentimes, the difference between a successful award and not. So, just to keep that in mind, when you're developing proposals and considering your team, don't overlook that piece. It's critically important, as everyone's stated already.
Yep, absolutely. So we're actually just about at the 12:30 mark, and I don't think we have time for any more questions. So I want to thank the panel today, Terry, Bart, Dave, Kara, Michael, Chris, John. Thank all of you for being here today to share your expertise. And I want to thank all the attendees for a lot of great questions. We didn't get to all the questions. I will get a copy of all the questions, and we'll make sure that we get answers to you on the ones that we didn't get to talk about during the presentation today. I want to remind you to open your chat box to receive the CE form link so that you can earn your learning units. You have to return that evaluation no later than midnight Wednesday, May 5th. And the webinar will be posted on the AIA New York State website in a few weeks. So thank you everyone for attending. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.